Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Healed Approach podcast. And today I have Andy Oram on the show. Thank you, Andy, for being here.
No problem. Thanks for having me on.
I am going to let you introduce yourself. Sometimes I'll introduce people, sometimes I let them introduce themselves. But I feel like, Andy, you need to do this one.
Okay.
Because I know essentially that who you work for, but I think it's a lot easier if you explain it.
Yeah, that's fine. So I work for E.H. Smith Builders Merchants.
Yep.
And have done for 15 very lovely years, obviously very lovely years. Started off doing sustainability for E.H. Smith. So we were looking at things like Passive House in quite a lot of detail.
Yes.
So back in the day when people thought that Passive House was either a substitute for Tupperware or the electronic funk scene in Berlin, they didn't really understand that it was a building model.
I'm going for the funk scene.
Yeah. So we were involved in a lot of first Passive House projects across England and Wales, which was really interesting to be part of that movement at the beginning. And then latterly went through different stages of the company, and now I specify the Porotherm clay block system full time, which is something that I've been involved in on and off all the way through my 15 years.
Okay, interesting. I didn't realise actually then that you'd been involved with the Passive House. I've had some people on the podcast talking about Passive House and been involved a little bit there and had conversations with the Institute and
I'm a massive Passive House geek, it has to be said, and I could empty a room before you know where you're at just when I start wanging on about Passive House. So it is something that I didn't know very much about at all when I started for Smiths.
Yeah.
But the more involved that we got with different projects, different clients and architects, the more and more I was hooked on it as a model, thinking, well, this is brilliant. Why isn't this just the standard way of building?
Well, exactly. And I think it has become a little bit more mainstream, hasn't it? But maybe not as, as much as we would like to see, I guess, considering it has been around, like you say, for quite some time, hasn't it? And
yeah, so it's one of those things that it's probably suffered from a bit of a marketing problem and a branding issue in the UK, because for a long time it was seen as a bit of a niche from the deep green community in construction, and people were like, oh, that's the one where you can't open the windows and all of that kind of malarkey.
Well, I think that's a legacy that's still kind of,
But now people are so hooked on it being an efficient way of building, and it's an efficient way of running a house. What we really need in the world of Passive House is to cut through with the public, go, it's a really comfortable way of living, it's a really comfortable environment to live and work in. The efficiency is there, so you're reducing your energy bills, you're reducing your energy load, but it's actually a really comfortable and pleasant environment to live and work in.
Yeah.
That's the messaging that the Passive House community kind of needs to work on now, because if we're going to get it to be a mass kind of taken on idea from the public for with the likes of the national house builders, they're less concerned about efficiency and more concerned about comfort, because it's their home and that's what they want their home to be. They want it to be comfortable.
Yeah, I think it has just been taken on, hasn't it, by a national house builder?
It has by a national house builder.
Yeah, I don't
whose
know.
name I'm reluctant to say out
I nearly
loud.
said it. Anyway.
Let's not give them any more oxygen and publicity.
No.
But well done for them for doing Passive House. But
exactly. And I think that's what we need to absolutely kind of take on board from that. So it's a great step forward for the for Passive House. But yeah. Tell us then about E.H. Smith and what they're doing things. I mean, obviously E.H. Smith are a family-run business, national business.
Yep.
How are they defining or redefining things in the building merchant space?
So one of the good things about Smiths is that we've always done something that's very slightly different. So the genesis of the company was going back to over 100 years ago. Mr. Smith used to trade cement and bricks from the sidings at Small Heath railway station in Birmingham, and then we grew across Birmingham and then grew across the country. And in the growth came things like the specification team. There wasn't really a spec market in the world of builders merchants until E.H. Smith started doing it. So we were innovators in that field, working with architects to get predominantly brick, but other materials specified as well. Mm-hmm. And then as the company developed and grew and construction started to change, and then you had things like Passive House coming through as well, that was not just brick and block, it was other materials that we could get involved with and understand. E.H. Smith has really, in the last probably 20 years or so, carved out a bit of a niche for itself in the world of merchants for really understanding innovative products that are coming through that maybe mainstream merchants haven't got to yet,
Okay.
and are really keen to work with architects and engineers and clients to introduce these products into new projects and schemes, and then help in the, so if we take Porotherm as the example, help to develop the market in the UK. So Porotherm is a product that's been made for over 100 years across continental Europe. It wasn't in the UK until 2008.
Yes,
and it was
yeah.
E.H. Smith who was the first company to bring it in with Wienerberger.
Why is that? Why is it something that kind of was just so slow to come into the UK market? I mean, do you have all the answers, Andy?
Sadly, yes, I do, because it's not just Passive House that I can geek out about, Rebecca. It's other things as well. So it goes back to after the First World War, where after the First World War, the UK had been producing a lot of armaments. A lot of that was still coming out through coal-fired furnaces and things like that, and we'd been producing a lot of ash. That was then turned into a useful building material in the form of concrete blocks. In Germany, however, and other Central European countries, they were looking at a different way to rebuild following the war, and they settled on clay as being a really good way of doing it because of the natural characteristics of clay. You can take a very, very small amount of material and expand it out to being something much bigger. So it's a very efficient material to build with. So they developed the cellular clay block as an alternative to a solid clay brick, which is what they'd been building with before, and it kind of went on from there. And it then swept across Europe as a really efficient way of manufacturing and building, and then efficiency in terms of energy as well for how the houses were built. But in the UK, we kept doing our own little thing on our own little island with our own little concrete blocks. And now things are beginning to change because the market's changing again and people have got to adapt.
What do you think it has led to that shift or that change?
I think there is a recognition from the construction industry now that the climate crisis is a thing.
Yeah.
And there does have to be some adaptation to how we work, the materials that we use, the provenance of those materials, the methods with which we build as well. And it doesn't just sit with the climate crisis either. It goes into other things as well, like health and safety.
Of course.
Contractors have had to become much more safety conscious over the course of time. Look back on YouTube to videos going back to like the 70s and 80s, and you got, all sorts of shenanigans happening on a building site that you wouldn't get these days at all.
Yeah.
Whether that's for good or for ill, it doesn't matter. There are fewer people being injured and fewer people dying on building sites. So that's kind of a good thing. So you link all of those things together, and the industry's just had to deal with the fact that the world's moving, the world's changing, and it's got to take its part in that as well. Yeah.
But what do you think was there? I don't know. This is all, I mean, we're hypothesizing a lot here, but, what was the resistance to change? Where did it come from for so long? Why is that even a thing? Why were we not part of, what else was happening?
I think so. I think it's a national thing, isn't it? So we have our own very British identity of what we do because we do it, thanks very much. And other people might do what they want to do, and we don't really want to accept that there might be better ways of doing things. And that's just kind of the British way of thinking in so many areas. I
think so. And I think kind of, again, we can only speculate, but I think agree with you that there's the culture, isn't there? We talk a lot about culture in construction. And I think a lot of the way that culture is made up in the UK is to do with that Britishness, isn't it? It's to do with that kind of, I don't know, I don't even know how to kind of describe it. Is it patriotism? I don't know. Do you know what I mean? In terms
belligerence is probably
yeah.
The national
probably.
characteristic of a Brit is belligerence.
Yeah. But I think it's again, it's like as we are becoming, the world is becoming such a smaller place, isn't it? And in terms of the way that we think, even in terms of it's changing in terms of just the way the way that demographics are changing in society and in the UK as well. Sorry, that's a much bigger topic, I guess. But, it all kind of feeds into that bigger picture. It all feeds into that bigger picture of sustainability. And I know we've had a brief conversation before, Andy, but kind of where do your thoughts and where do your passions lie in sustainability?
So third area of geekness, besides Passive House, cellular clay block history, and now kind of environmental care and whatnot. As far back as I can remember, I've just been really passionate about the natural world and wanting to care for the planet. And I don't know what started that, but I remember my dad got me a membership of the YOC when I was about 5, which was the Young Ornithologists Club.
I'm glad you. I was like, what, yeah. YOC? Please do.
That won't surprise people who know me, perhaps. But it's fed all the way through, and for the whole of my life, I've just been really passionate about wanting to not just protect but enhance the natural world as much as possible.
Yeah.
And now that I'm doing a job that enables me to actually try and play an active part in that within a bigger industry is something that I find really interesting, and that's what fires me up.
Yeah, it's really interesting as well, because I feel like it's in terms of the industry and the legacy that we can leave and how we can weave all of that into it. I think that's really important, and I think it's really great to hear people that have got that passion embedded within them, because I think it really gives you that fire in your belly, I guess.
It does, and both positively and negatively, because sometimes you can just get really frustrated,
yeah.
and you have to then kind of talk yourself around a little bit and go, okay, so in order to make the change, you've got to take people with you. You can't just
I think that's
shout from the sidelines
yeah.
and say that people are idiots and who don't understand what they're doing. You've got to take people with you on whatever you're trying to communicate and get them on board with why you're doing it. Because if people can understand the why, they're more likely to adapt and change their own behaviour as well.
I think that's a really important point as well, and I think that's been a real key theme and key topic in terms of conversations that I've had on this podcast and beyond, is about this idea, or not this idea, this doing of, bringing people along on the journey, because otherwise you can end up, and it's hard. And this is one of the reasons I wanted to even, why I started this podcast, is because you can talk about things, you can write blogs, you can write articles, you can do, short videos on LinkedIn or YouTube, but you're not really going to bring people along with you until you start having meaningful conversations and you get people around the room, you sit down with people and you kind of thrash some of these things out. And I think that, from what you said before, I imagine that's kind of, an approach that E.H. Smith are taking as well, because obviously they, like you say, they're bringing products, they're bringing innovations in front of people, and they're obviously having those conversations and collaborating.
Yeah, and it's also important to do these things without a sense of pie-ness and self-righteousness.
Yes.
Because, there is a level with all the environmental and climate conversations that are going on, we're all hypocrites. And as soon as you accept the fact that we're all hypocrites, then that kind of puts everyone on an equal footing.
Yeah.
So as much as I'm really passionate about what I believe in from an environmental point of view, you lift the lid on my life and there'll be things in there that make me look like a hypocrite. There are people that are absolutely brilliant in the world of academia or in construction companies who really push for making buildings more energy efficient and reducing the impact on resources, but they might have a passion for vintage sports cars or something like that that is then seemingly contrary to what they're talking about in the rest of their life, but actually it's just part of being a person with the flaws that we all have.
I love that. And I think that it's part of being human. And it's part of the human experience, and I think we've always got to try and, it's really interesting because you say that, because then people, I think there's this other aspect where people go, oh, she's doing this and she's doing that, but behind the scenes she's doing this and she's doing that. And it's like, well, what does it really matter if a person is trying just to do their best, but actually they're also human and they've got wants, needs, likes that they need to, indulge or satisfy. Who are we to judge? And I think we just all have to do the best that we can do with what we have as well. And I think it's also stripping ego aside a little bit. And sometimes you can't do that. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. I talk about this a lot in terms of kind of how I can stand up and do the things I do and talk about the things that I do and what have you. And that's an element of me thinking, right, I'm here for a purpose. I'm here. I've got a mission, and I feel, very, very passionate about that mission. And sometimes I've got to think, I don't give a damn what people say. I've got to, no, that's not true. It's not that I never give a damn what people say, but I think to transcend that fear, because you're that little kind of voice in your head is nothing in terms of the grand scheme of the legacy that you're trying to leave, if that resonates. But then on the other hand as well, I'm still a girl, I'm still a human, I still want to wear nice clothes, and I still want to do nice things, and I still, all of that still matters, you know?
We're having that exact debate within the company at the moment. So EH Smith we've partnered with a company called Anistic, who are helping us to understand our carbon footprint as a company. So again, from a merchant's point of view, there aren't that many builders merchants out there who are going through the same kind of root and branch analysis of their carbon impact as we are, and that's because we want to do the right thing. Yeah. But at the same time, we sell materials that on the face of it are dreadful for the environment, and we've got to balance that mix between supplying what our customers need in order to make the construction industry tick over, and also wanting to do the right thing that our board of directors and our owners ultimately believe is the right thing. Mm-hmm. And that's always a tricky balance. It doesn't matter if you're a multi-million-pound business or just a bloke and a woman from the East Midlands in England, just trying to live your life.
Just trying to get through and trying to juggle, whatever life throws at them, whilst also trying to be a good person and do the right thing.
And a good parent, and a good partner, and a good son or daughter, a good sibling, a good neighbour. I mean, there are so many challenges that we're all trying to wrestle with, and it just takes over so many different parts of your life that you've got to juggle all of these things, and it's about prioritising what you're able to then actually have a positive impact on that can make the difference.
And I think that's really important as well, kind of, there's a really important piece to talk about in the whole sustainability picture as well, because I think I see a lot, people trying to collaborate and innovate and, and do new things and, tread new water, etc. But then fundamentally, you've still got to go home and deal with the kids, the partner, paying the bills, etc. You can do, and I think, as organisations and as businesses and as leaders, we've always got to remember that as well, because as much as we want to make sure that we're collaborating, we've all still got our own little things that are going on, and it's important to remember that we've all got flaws and we're all going to make mistakes, and there is no right or wrong way of doing this.
So we've, as a company, the thing that would, we're a family-owned business, so we've got a level of freedom that a shareholder-tied business wouldn't have.
Yeah.
But the ultimate ambition of EH Smith Builders Merchants is to sell building materials for a profit.
Yeah.
That's what the company does. But within that, there are things that we can do to feed into reusing materials, not just always taking virgin material, trying to help support reuse or recycle where we can. And that's what the company is very, very good at. So an example of that, if I can, we're working with Lyons and Anoot, a well-known brick subcontractor based in London. They've developed Circulabrick, which is a way of taking bricks from a deconstructed building, cleaning off the mortar, and so that you can then reuse those bricks again in a different building or on a different project. And we're partnering with them on that. Now, that's not us being able to sell more bricks.
No.
So it's going against the modus operandi of what a company should be doing. But it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that I think sets us apart from a lot of our peers and competitors.
And I think, and you're partnering as well with another business, with a like-minded business as well, which is powerful in itself too. But I think it's using your privilege. It's using your place of privilege to do good, even coming on this podcast and supporting, the mission that I'm on in terms of kind of, trying to change things and get people to collaborate and do better in the industry. You're supporting that as well. So I think it's about that balance always, isn't it? And I think that's really an important message, I think, also to take home in terms of sustainability, because if we, sustainability, yes, we've got to look at it from the climate, from the, from that angle in terms of the impact that we're having and climate change is happening and we can't run away from it. We're seeing it in, in our everyday life. And I think that, but what we've also got to remember is that, you know, to be sustainable, we've also got to make sure that as humans we're happy and healthy and you know, kind of doing things that kind of fill us up in all different areas of life, you know. And yeah, it's that balance, and it's that you've mentioned this before about how there is no black and white. There's just constant, you know, shades of grey.
Yeah, and it's also understanding what sustainability actually means.
Yeah, go on, come on, because I mean, you know,
I have to be a little bit careful because I am still an employee. But sustainability, if you break down what sustainability means, it's the ability to sustain whatever it is that you're doing. And what the term has become is a byword for what should be environmentalism or environmental protection, but it's not. It's now just a word that people throw out. And when I started at EH Smith, my boss, John Cave, gave me a little cartoon that was a graph that said by the year 2050, all conversations will just be the word sustainability repeated over and over again. And it does feel sometimes like we're moving in that direction, because something that is sustainable is not necessarily environmental.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's about sustaining where we're at right now. And from an environmental point of view, that hasn't worked for us, because sustaining the level of material consumption and emissions of greenhouse gases has got us to the point where we're at with the climate crisis. So sustaining that isn't environmentally conscious.
Exactly.
In fact, it's the contrary.
Yeah.
What is sustainable, or what is sustainability, is trying to work and nurture people in a workplace, whether that's people who have got disadvantaged backgrounds or lower levels of education or are coming from minority backgrounds, and giving them an equal voice and an equal place in the society in which we're running. That, for me, is sustainability. What isn't sustainable is labelling something as green, eco, or whatever, and then shoving it out and thinking that you've ticked a box by doing something that says, yeah, this is an eco product and therefore we've done our bit. That's not sustainability. That's at worst greenwash, and at best just a bit lazy.
Yeah, 100% greenwashing. I mean, that's another kind of rabbit hole to go down, I think, as well, because I think greenwashing is something that, you know, I think we do see a lot of. And I think, I don't know, again, I'd love to hear your perspective on this, because I think sometimes we can make claims or we can say things and we're getting it wrong, but we're not always conscious that we're getting it wrong. And it's about holding your hands up and owning that. But sometimes we are blatantly just saying things to try and, you know, from a marketing perspective, you know, marketing, I guess, is where, you know, the greenwashing has really kind of come into it, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know what your thoughts are or your take on experiences are around that.
Yeah, so if we take my experience within the builders merchants, part of my role at one point was being a buyer, and I worked with the timber products, and so I got to understand the world of timber much more than I had done previously, which was, again, really interesting. I won't bore you with it right now, it's not the time or the place. But while I was in that role, we took the decision as a company to only stock plywood that has got an FSC registration. Now, on the face of it, that could be seen as being greenwash, as a message that we're putting out to the market saying we're only stocking FSC registered plywood products. But the reality is, if it doesn't carry that certification, it could come from anywhere, have any kind of impact on the environment that isn't being tracked or traced or held accountable to. And so a small thing like that can actually have a big difference if a company like ours goes along with it. So we're saying we're not prepared to accept materials where we can't interrogate the provenance of that material.
Okay.
FSC doesn't mean it's going to be perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it does mean that you can interrogate your supply chain to make sure that it's not part of deforestation. There isn't slave labour in the factories and the processing plants, things like that. So that is environmental sustainability. And the reason that the FSC registration as a whole became much better known within the builders merchant industry was when people could just sell whatever they wanted and no one cared. And then Greenpeace started protesting outside builders merchants because they were importing mahogany from South America that had contributed to the deforestation of the Amazon. Like all of this, there's huge stories that go on behind the scenes of all of the stuff that we consume every single day, whether that's as a contractor or as a consumer. There's so much behind the veil that the typical Joe Public person doesn't know, maybe doesn't care about either. And that's why it's incumbent on people like E.H. Smith, or like the lines in a new example with Circulabrick, or with the likes of Van der Sanden, who are developing innovative products in order to minimise their environmental impact, to do the hard graft, because they're the ones with the ability to make the change and put the products out there that people can then buy. If Van der Sanden decide that they want to change all of their kilns and their firing processes, the builders don't have a choice in that. They've got to buy the product that's fired in the kiln that's made that's using less carbon. If the client specifies that the bricks that they want to use need to be partly reclaimed or partly taken from a deconstructed building, the bricklayer doesn't or shouldn't have a say in that. That's down to the person who's actually making the financial commitment on that project to make that decision and go ahead with it. What we've got in construction is, I think, sometimes, well, not sometimes, a lot of the time, the tail wags the dog, where you've got people working to the lowest common denominator, which is how much is that going to cost? What impact is that going to have? You know, the value engineering process, it's not value engineering. It's making sure that somewhere along the line, someone makes more profit than they were going to previously. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, because of a lack of understanding in large contractors or with quantity surveyors who don't understand why a particular product has been specified for a particular reason, an environmental, sustainable, call it what you will, type material is often the first one that will get the chop because it's less understood and maybe a bit more expensive. That means it's in the firing line for being chopped out. And that's something that I think we need to address as well.
I think that you hit the nail on the head there in terms of less understood. I do still feel like a lot of what is happening in the industry does come down to that. We say that, you know, don't get me wrong, there is still this, you know, we're still very profit driven, and, you know, there is still, you know, who's going to make the most money where and what have you. But I think fundamentally, I do think the issue comes down to not having enough collaboration and conversations and people understanding enough, because we're always a bit fearful of what we don't understand. Now, that's like kind of, you know, additional expense. If somebody really understood the impact of that, you know, it might not be such a problem, you know. And I just think, because I think it, you know, it was, I got one of you guys that when we spoke before on the previous podcast was talking about how it might have been Dave Mills, and he was talking about how, you know, the industry needs lots of different people doing lots of different things, and it does, and that's a real strength. Okay, but again, it can also be a weakness if we're not collaborating, because then you've got lots of different people doing different things, and people are invested in different things, and then it's like, well, then different values are going to lie in different areas. So this is then where the kind of the gel doesn't come together. If I don't know if I've explained that very well, but
can I give two examples from a Porotherm point of view?
Please do.
One good, one bad.
Yes.
We'll start with the bad one first. There was a main contractor, a well-known national main contractor, who was doing a passive house project, and the design team were quite keen to find a lower carbon alternative to light gauge steel frame. So they came across Porotherm. The people who were making the financial decisions weren't as familiar with Porotherm as they could have been. And so they looked at it and said, well, they didn't really understand how to cost it or what the benefit would be. And so they went with an aerated concrete block instead.
Yeah.
So knocked out steel frame. That's a good thing, because steel frame is horrendous from a carbon point of view. But they went for an aerated concrete block instead of Porotherm, even though Porotherm would have cost them £1 million less
Wow.
And that came from the bricklaying subcontractor, that it was £1 million saving if they went with Porotherm. But because they didn't understand it and they weren't willing to understand it, they went with what they knew.
Yeah.
Now, the flip side was in Bristol, there was a social housing project that was a joint venture between a local housing association and a residents group. A plot of land became available and they worked together in, favourite word, collaboration with one another on the types of houses that were needed for that part of the city, the types of materials that the residents wanted used, and they wanted low impact, natural where possible. Ideally, it would have been something that would be breathable, so it would help to manage moisture as well as give it better quality air inside the building. So they settled on Porotherm as the inner leaf, as the main wall structure, with then timber cladding or breathable render on the outside. And that's a wonderful example of how you've got a client working with a local community, an architect coming on board and joining the party as well, and the contractor then buying into it and going, we're not going to try and VE this because actually we understand that there are enough people who are invested in this happening as it's been designed to actually then deliver it. And it's a lovely community. Merry Hill in Bristol. Big shout out to the Merry Hill crew down there and their wonderful housing scheme that they put together as the residents. It wasn't just the housing association.
I love that. And I think that's a really great place to kind of wrap things up as well. A really positive story of where when collaboration meets integrity and, you know, and great products, I think that's two really great examples that really do shine a light on where we need to focus, I think, moving forward. You know, there's lots of positive stuff going on and, you know, we're in an industry that, you know, we can really have an impact on climate and people. So let's keep collaborating and let's keep, you know, doing what we're doing.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Andy. It's been such a pleasure. I've learnt a lot. And as always, excited to see where all of this is going to go.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.